Are you there, Professor Adnan Hussein from Gorilla History?
Yes,
You're on later.
I am here, and I
And
just loved that conversation. And I think I've mentioned that Alan Holmes in the past from the Hannity and Combs. What it was,
yeah,
Alan Combs. Yes, that it seemed like his presence there was just to dramatize the weakness of the left. He was just
right,
there to be absolutely dunked on. So
right.
that is part of I guess they wanted something like a Crossfire type show that CNN had pioneered, but they gradually moved to the point where they thought even the pretense of debate was no longer useful or as entertaining as just having Hannity give his monologues.
Right.
So
Anyway, let me turn off Peter's video just so he can. I want to give everybody there. There we go. Professor Adnan Hussein, you'll be on later with Henry.
Oh, you're going to play that interview already tonight. I thought maybe it
Yeah.
might not make it in until Thursday, but that's great.
Oh, we're going to play it. It's a great interview. Let me ask you about, if you don't mind, Hungary and Orban and Tucker Carlson and his take on the leader of Hungary, who's been there for 20 years. It's my understanding that Tucker Carlson is the number one show on Fox, but they don't make money because everybody, including the My Pillow guy, have pulled their commercials. And so he has to find other sources of income. His father, Tucker Carlson's father, married the heir to the Swanson frozen dinner fortune, and she adopted Tucker. And Tucker's father is this questionable journalist, opportunistic infection. I think he ran the Voice of America under Reagan at one time, and he's a lobbyist, a right-wing lobbyist who is now lobbying, reportedly, for Hungary. And Hungary is spending billions of dollars promoting whatever Orban believes is conservatism. I can't help but think that this is a cash move on behalf of Tucker. I don't know. I can't back that up with facts, but I would have to assume that he's rehabilitating Orban for money. That's what I like to believe. That nobody would truly believe what Orban believes. He's cracking down on LGBTQ books in Hungary right now and building fences to keep the filth out. How bad is Orban? How bad is Hungary right now? And how bad, what does that say about Fox, Tucker Carlson, and what the right in America idealizes?
Well, I mean, it shows you what right-wing populism tends toward, is finding scapegoats for economic problems that are distractions from the real material issues of the capitalist system. They find, foreigners, immigrants, refugees, racial others, ethnic and religious others as the source of all of the problems. And it's a common trope that we've seen, of course, in European history and all, global history, but especially in European history, it's very disturbing to see the resurgence of the same kinds of discourses that were applied to Jews and, the Roma people, in the era around World War II. And so I think Hungary really is something like the leading edge of far-right movements of extreme ultranationalism. And the fact that it has a place on Fox News in America, and particularly on the most popular show and Tucker Carlson's show, that has departed from some of the corporate right wing orientation of Fox's typical programming, like a Hannity. We were just talking about Hannity.
Hannity's stupid. Tucker Carlson is not. That's what's scary.
Yeah, I mean, he's clever. I don't know what his real ideological background is. When he was wearing a bow tie and trying to be, a younger George Will back in the 90s and earlier 2000s, he didn't come across as quite as intelligent and urbane and educated and sophisticated as George Will, who could write a wonderful column in Newsweek, talk about baseball, and then peddle far right, kinds of ideas in a much more palatable.
This doesn't.
Yes, I think he was, and it may have been in history even. So, somebody who knew something of what he was talking about. But somebody like Tucker Carlson was trying to be a younger version of that, but I don't think he was nearly as educated and sophisticated. I think he's more clever than intelligent, and what he has done is sussed out a space in the right that wasn't being filled by the corporate orientation of, Fox News hosts, where there was anti-elite reaction and displeasure in the Republican Party and with the sort of Reagan Democrats and their later trajectory. It wasn't being filled. So I think he's quite cleverly captured some of the critiques of the injustices of our system, the insecurity that has happened to working class communities, particularly white working class communities that were used to the privileges of maleness and whiteness in American culture as a hegemonic kind of status, that even if they were oppressed workers and even if there were declines in standards of living, they had that to hang on to. But now they feel that that is being seeded in the culture. And he has, I think, exploited that anxiety and that politics of grievance that is so important to the right wing in a much more effective way, by talking about economic issues in ways that others are uncomfortable doing so in the pro-business orientation. So he offers a kind of critique of corporate capitalism that is globalist, that it is elitist. But his remedies are never that we need to organize workers. There's always this kind of conservative appeal to making America great again, and a return to, or a real sense, it seems, of the decline of the white male paternal authority in the family. Like, this is sort of waning because you could earn enough of a living to buttress the patriarchy and the male position in the household. So sort of the things that Dr. Fraud often talks about the shifts in America's economy that are having effects on the family, on gender roles. He's really tapped into that, I think, in a more effective way, by at least articulating that there is an economic grievance behind all of this.
Identity Europa. They're a white supremacist group, and they, I think, they either come out of. I don't know where they come out of. I thought maybe they come out of America. What is universal here? What are we saying in Hungary, which, by the way, George Soros comes to us from Hungary?
Yes. Yeah. And he's sort of the anti-Orban figure. Like, Orban uses the figure of Soros and the fact that he's Jewish in order to, kind of connect him with the globalist conspiracy that is there to undermine the integrity of the nation. And this is one thing that I think is very important to understand, is the way in which anti-Semitism and Islamophobia come together in these far-right scenarios. Yeah. Well, it's not just, it's not just that they hate everybody who's different. It's that they have this sense of the collaboration of roles that are designed to undermine, their society. So what you have is the globalist conspiracy of, Jewish finance being used to pay for and finance the hordes of Muslim refugees to be sponsored and to come into Europe and undermine, the society and the culture. And this is something that we saw in the Tree of Life synagogue attack, the massacre that killed worshipers at the synagogue, is that it was also, it had an active chapter of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society that was an institution that had developed to evacuate Jews from, Nazi Europe fleeing fascism to resettle them elsewhere. And they have continued to do work on resettling refugees. And so one of the complaints that this far-right fascist who, killed worshipers there had was associating Jews with the presence of the sponsoring of Muslim Syrian refugees to come in as a danger and a threat. And so it's the kind of linking of the two, not just because they're, different, they're not white Christian people, but because they're actually associated with one another in some kind of grand conspiracy. And that's what Orban is saying about, his fellow Hungarian, right? Right. Saying that Soros is doing this, and so he's made him kind of enemy number one as a figure. And we see that kind of discourse also, of course, in the United States in far-right circles that seem to want to blame so many problems on some kind of elite global conspiracy associated with George Soros.
And they think that the Jews and the globalists, Davos, want immigrants swarming over the borders because it's cheap labor.
Yes. Yeah. And that is the far right's more populist argument against immigration that puts them sometimes in conflict with the pro-business or corporate interest in sponsoring, cheaper labor, for capitalist needs. So this is how they are formulating a critique that has some purchase and resonance with people, is saying that they are sponsoring these people to come to undermine good paying jobs. And we'll find out that much of this is the sort of rhetoric in the interview that we had with Adam King about right-wing populism and organized labor in Ontario mining industries, is that this is a trope that's used. And the problem, it seems to me, is that it does address some genuine complaints that one might have about the structure of the global capitalist system. And if we don't find ways to articulate this in clear terms, we're losing opportunities for workers' solidarity, because instead they're simply going to blame other workers, poor immigrants, for their own exploitation.
So when you look at somebody like Senator Josh Hawley, who uses veiled anti-Semitic terms, talks about the cosmopolitan elite and the internationalists and the globalists, and he's been called out as an anti-Semite, Josh Hawley, Yale Law School. Tom Cotton from Arkansas, another lawyer, right-winger, who wrote a piece in the New York Times suggesting that Donald Trump send the military to the streets to combat BLM. These are well-educated people. That doesn't mean anything, but they're well-educated. Do they believe that they're populists, or do they believe they're tricking their constituents into voting for the right, for the conservatives? Do they have a problem when Josh Hawley writes a book attacking big tech and using, as Professor Harvey J. Cade would say, taking hold of the populist history and talking about antitrust, when they appropriate our language, do they mean it, or are they just scoring linguistic points? Are they playing with us, or do they mean it?
This is very hard to know, and I don't know if intentions and the sincerity of their intentions is really the most important thing to be concerned with in some ways, because what they find is that it's effective and it reinforces their interest in promoting, the arguments that they want to make and garnering or tapping into the justifiable, anger, outrage, insecurity, fear, and anxiety that's available for political purpose. That's what politicians do. That's their job, is to find ways to ensure that they will be elected and to promote the positions that they're interested in doing, the policies and so on. And what I'm concerned about is that it just doesn't seem as if Democrats, left-wing politicians, I mean, we see what happened with Nina Turner, is that we've not come up with our own critique and argument against neoliberalism. And I don't feel like just going back to some of the previous rhetoric about worker solidarity. In fact, this was a topic that we discussed, is that it's very hard to encourage international worker solidarity. I mean, you find yourself trapped by a nationalist kind of language, and it's very powerful to blame global forces, because in fact, actually, that is the process by which capitalism has continued to find value, by exploiting labor wherever it can find it. That is simply the process. And imagining somehow that some national restrictions would be the solution, I think is I mean, it may be the first step you have to trying to take back some control, but it clearly it clearly isn't the panacea. And
So if we had
others are better at making that argument about nationalism.
if two things that I find curious. One is their messaging on the right is lockstep. And I noticed it in France. I noticed Marine Le Pen. Is it the National Front? What is the right wing?
The National Front.
They are anti-immigrant, and they're also anti-mask and anti-vax. They took to the streets as Macron is issuing mask mandates. The same people in France, of all places, who are taking to the streets are the same people, are the DeSantises and the Abbotts in our country. And I just find that curious that what does that say about that kind of thinking? What is the unifying thread here, that you're anti-science, anti-mask, anti-vax, anti-immigrant? What is the common denominator here? What is it? And I can't help but think they're getting marching orders from somebody from high above.
Well, I mean, the coordination of it is certainly quite interesting. I mean, this is the interesting thing, is that nationalism is supposed to be a response to globalization, that, oh no, we want to have our distinctive cultures and our distinctive practices and protect this particular social space of the nation, this political sovereignty of the nation. And nationalisms are not supposed to be compatible with one another. They're actually supposed to be hostile to one another. I mean, isn't that what happened in World War I? Is that German nationalism, French nationalism, and we end up having...
And Europe has always been national. That's how they've galvanized.
Well, in modern history, yes. Right. I mean, that's been the problem of nationalism, causing and, antithetical, sorts of political idioms. Like the structure might be the same, but the content is supposed to be different, because what it means to be French is going to be different from what it means to be German. And so they have some kind of cultural heritage, national reason to have hostility or to compete with one another. What's interesting in this far right international that we're witnessing emerging is how similar the rhetoric is about what defines their positions and their identity. So a Hungarian nationalist anti-vaxxer is really in, commensurate with an American anti-vaxxer. There'll still be ultra nationalists, but they don't really differ from one another. They have very similar positions, and there seems to be a lot of coordination. This is something that certainly was, I think, foreseen, and was a hope of people like Steve Bannon and others who thought that you have to have some kind of civilizational compact, a kind of Pax, a Western kind of political communion on some level that stands against China and the world of Islam. And this is something that seems to come straight out of Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations article in Foreign Affairs, and then subsequently the book that he wrote that expanded on that thesis, which identified civilization as the highest unit of identity. And so that's something that transcends the particular nationalisms of France, Hungary, Germany, the US, is this idea of the West. And the idea of the West only really makes sense geopolitically if you think of it in conflict with some other great world regions.
What we are not.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fiction. I mean, but all these identities are fictions that we create. They have some basis in historical reality, but they're also a creation of our contemporary consciousness. And I think that's what explains the symmetry that you were just noticing between these different far-right positions, is that their nationalisms don't actually conflict with other far-right nationalisms in many respects, because what they're adhering to is an idea of a greater, grand, Christian Western civilization that has to be defended against various internal and external threats. And those threats, the other aspect or the other idiom, I think, is this anti-elitism. That seems so important, which is the failures of all of these promises of progress and of, so what if we've got all of this high tech, if it doesn't lead to people living better, more dignified lives with less oppression, more security? If you're not receiving that, it seems that all of these elite institutions are actually failures, and worse than failures, that they are the source of the problem, because some people are clearly doing very well, from Silicon Valley, from the elite educational institutions. But these benefits that are supposed to be part of an overall project of progress and human betterment are not being shared out in the sort of way that would give people confidence that these institutions actually have authority. It seems like we have really right now very much a kind of crisis of authority.
Before you go, President Obama's 60th birthday party, let me play devil's advocate and defend it, because I started the show saying if we lose the midterms, it will be because of that party on Martha's Vineyard. It was so out of step, out of touch.
It's a very let them eat cake, or as Nancy Pelosi might say, let them eat ice cream sort of moment.
Yeah. It was disgraceful. But let me offer up the thinking in Obama's head. He did it to drive Trump crazy. That he brought in all these celebrities, and it was multicultural, and Donald Trump, can't even get Garth Brooks to show up to his. I don't know, that he was playing some kind of three-dimensional chess.
That's supposed to be a defense. It seems to me that's exactly the kind of thing. His humiliation of Donald Trump right? At one of those
At the
presidential.
White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that clearly, may have motivated Trump more than almost anything else, in his politics. That seems to me a dangerous game to play.
And there's no other. I try all week, and I was reading about it and seeing who was showing up and who was cut from the list, and I'm thinking, I have my problems with Barack Obama, but this is a really bright man. He cannot be this stupid to throw this kind of party. Forget the COVID stuff. It wasn't a super spreader party. That's one thing that those people are not going to come down with is COVID.
I think maybe less stupid than just these sorts of circles of privilege are very out of touch with.
How could you be that out of touch? How could you not know?
That's what everybody's aspiring to. I mean, it's all this politics of celebrity, and it's almost as if everybody lives through a mediated media culture. This is the ideal, is to be living that sort of a life, and that is very American to aspire to.
But that's not who he sold himself as.
No. And that's why, I think his idea of success, I mean, he's been a terrible presidency president. I mean, this is no Jimmy Carter, who may have had a terrible presidency, but who at least afterwards has done a lot of good works and, built institutions and helped people around the world and been a modest figure, a kind of humble figure embodying the ideal of a public servant. I mean, Obama said that he was going to be in solidarity with people's movements, and he got his, kind of marching shoes ready to go. He hasn't fulfilled any of that. And I think it's a huge.
He's a lickspittle, if that's the word. He's a lickspittle to the bankers. And now he's got the $12 million estate on Martha's Vineyard. He's playing golf at a club where you have to cough up $350,000 just to join it, plus like $50,000. He's just a cartoon of swinish privilege. That's what that party was. It was like
he's acting like he's a celebrity, and that's what's happened to our politics. That's what our culture is about. He's just embodying it. He's one of the ultimate celebrities.
He does look cool. I mean, I gotta say, there's like a James Bond. Like, I looked at him, I go, must be great to be Barack Obama. I have to say, I look at him going, it must be great being Barack Obama right now. And it's a gigantic FU to the Republicans. Unfortunately, a gigantic FU, a much bigger FU to the people who voted for him. I mean, he's as bad as Romney. I mean, in 2012, he demonized who Romney was, just as out of touch.
Yeah.
Just as out of touch. I mean, I could see him eating pizza with a knife and fork right now, which is the great. Thank you for, we'll see you later on the show.
Oh, great. That's